Strap on your motorcycles and get that driver's high. It's time to talk about Great Teacher Onizuka, the franchise. With us is our special guest, Nick Rowe from allcomic.com. How are you doing, Nick?
Yoroshiku. What's up, guys?
So, yeah, we're really happy to have you on today, Nick, especially since apparently you are a huge fan of GTO.
Yeah, no, I'm big on GTO. That franchise has been a big part of my life since the early 2000s. So I'm happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me on, guys.
Hey, no problem. I guess as far as where we want to start, I guess we could just start there with, I guess, how we all got into GTO. And I feel like since Nick was alluding to it just now, Nick, you want to talk about your history with the franchise and how you first got into it?
Yeah, sure. So back in, I want to say like 2000, 2001, my cousin went to Japan to visit friends and stuff over there. And the one thing he brought back for me was GTO Volume 1 and 2. And, you know, he handed it to me and he's like, this is the most badass comic I've ever seen. And he opened directly to that page where Onizuka is screaming at that dude in the BMW in the first volume over trading his Air Max for that dude's BMW so he can look cool on a date. And he's like, this is the most ridiculous thing ever. It's crazy. And so, you know, I flipped through it. I couldn't read a word of Japanese at that point. But, you know, it just was so ridiculous and so crazy. And he started explaining all the background, like the fact that Onizuka was part of a Bosozoku back in the day before this comic starts, and what that was and what like Yankee are and stuff like that. So that also got me started on those particular subcultures over in Japan, which I'm now completely obsessed with because they're fantastic and incredible. But it's interesting after having learned a lot of that stuff and going back into GTO and seeing all the weird, subtle stuff that Fujisawa puts in there. It's pretty cool. But anyway, so I continued to be interested in that stuff. I got through GTO, and then the GTO Tokyopop actually put the GTO anime out at first. So I was thrilled about that, and I dove into that and got way into it and showed it to my high school's anime club. And then I found out there was a TV drama. So I torrented all of that, or I found means that weren't on streaming services at that point. I don't know if you guys are... Anyway. So, I downloaded all of that, and I didn't have high expectations, but it turned out to be really, really cool and really awesome. And then Tokyo Shock released the GTO movie that was based off that drama.
Oh,
and
okay.
I got that, and, you know, so anytime something new GTO comes out, you know, I'm generally interested, but, you know, I managed to track down Bad Company a few years after because I saw that he had done that, and I got that, and then 14 Days in Shonan came out a number of years later, and, you know, I admittedly didn't pick that up because I read through it, I was like, this is... So anyway, definitely a lifelong fan of the whole franchise.
So I keep forgetting. So is Bad Company, has that ever been licensed, or is that still unlicensed?
No, it's never been licensed by anyone, and it probably never will be licensed. The only reason we got 14 Days in Shonan, that part of the agreement for vertical licensing that was they had to finish publishing Shonan Junai Gumi. So that's why volumes like 16 through the end came out from Vertical, but they didn't do any of the backlog. That was part of the contract for getting 14 days.
Yeah.
So, since you're such a big fan of Bosokozu culture and like Yankee manga, are you a fan of stuff like Rokudenashi Blues and Kyokar Orewa too?
I'm actually not familiar with those, so I'm going to take a note and check those out later. But no, I mean, I've gotten into stuff like Crows and Crow Zero and all that stuff. Man, I'm trying to think of other titles off the top of my head. Oh yeah, like Cromartie High School. Oh my god, that series is perfection.
Yeah, I love Cromartie. Yeah,
so,
that's interesting. So you got into a lot more of the other kind of Yankee stuff that was in magazine. I just find it interesting that Shonan Junai Gumi, Roku Denashi Blues, and Kirikara Orewa were all like Yankee manga that were running in Jump, Sunday, and Magazine at the same time. So it's kind of interesting to, compare those series and think about them since they're all contemporaries. Mm-hmm. But to steer back into my history with GTO, it's pretty straightforward, I would think. When I started getting into the anime community, back into it rather, a little more, around 2012 when Toonami came back and that reignited my interest in watching more anime and participating in communities again. That's when I joined Animation Revelation, and a series that a lot of the members there are a huge fan of is GTO and the franchise as a whole. So kind of just getting recommendation from them, I checked out the franchise a little bit, I also heard a little bit about it before from Heizu Otaku's review of it, back when he was doing anime reviews. But so I started, my exposure to it was I picked up just some random volumes of 14 Days that was at the library and read through it to get a taste of the franchise. And I liked Onizuka as a character, kind of like the setup. So from there, I decided to read the original, and I, went through the entire GTO manga. And after that, a couple years later, I watched the anime. I think it was a gap between finishing the manga and watching the anime. But since getting into GTO, I've read up on all the other side stories and spin-offs, and I own all of Shonan Junai Gumi finally, after a 2-year process of collecting them all. But I only have just started reading it. I only just finished the first volume recently. But I've dabbled in all the franchise, and I've also dabbled in Fujisawa's body of work in particular. And I have things to say about Fujisawa's work and the GTO franchise as a whole. But as for GTO itself, I am a fan, and I really enjoy it.
All right. Well, I guess I can just get started here, because I have a bit of history with GTO and kind of a history with trying to collect it or whatever. So I think for as long as I've been into manga, which I think at this point is definitely over 10 years at this point. I actually started getting into manga around 2006. I was in middle school at the time. And I think for as long as I've been into manga, I have seen GTO just every once in a while. I'm pretty sure when Borders was still opened and when that was still a thing, and I still have one 10 minutes away from where I lived, I'm pretty sure I've seen volumes at the Tokyopop release there every once in a while, and I would just kind of catch it everywhere. And for the longest time, I have been aware of GTO, and I had been aware that people really liked this series, but I didn't really know anything about it, and I had always it was always a series I had been always meaning to get to. And then when I finally started looking it up, back in the day when I didn't have as much money to read manga, I would just read most of it online. And I think the reason I started buying and looking into trying to collect all the Tokyopop release of GTO was because I remember the scans I had found for GTO online I didn't think were very pleasing to look at. I tried re-looking them up again, and I don't know if I'm just not looking in the right places anymore or whatnot, but the scans I had found for GTO, I don't know who was responsible for them. I don't know what group did them or whatever, but these particular scans I had found, they would color in the speech bubbles and stuff, and they would all be really ugly colors and shit, like blues and pinks, and it was just, I was like, why does it look like this? So that was when I thought, maybe I'd rather just buy this. And years later at my local mall, at our little ma and pa anime store or whatever, they had pretty much all of GTO for $5 a volume. So for a year, I would just go up there every once in a while and just start collecting whatever GTO they had, because it's $5 a volume. That's a pretty good deal in my opinion. So I eventually collected all of GTO that way. And it's also worth noting that I guess we'll probably talk about it a little bit, but a big thing about me getting into GTO was that at that point, the only experience I had with Tokyopop was I'd actually read all of their release of Wraithmaster. I had that in my high school's library. And that was all the experience with Tokyopop I had. So, I had seen around that, like, people were really shitting on Tokyopop, and I honestly had no idea why. And then, when I started collecting GTO, I finally got all of it, and I started, reading it, tweeting about it on Twitter or whatever. That's when Nick started to tell me about why people exactly were shitting on Tokyopop, because of really a lot of reasons, but one of them being that like Tokyopop's actual work, their actual releases just weren't really that great in general in terms of like translation, quality, and all that kind of stuff. So it was kind of sobering to hear that, I had basically spent probably over $100 on this collection of GTO that, from a company that apparently nobody likes. So I was kind of upset about that at first. But I was like, this still might be scanlation quality, I guess, but like I would rather still read Tokyopop's release than whatever scans I had found online like years and years and years ago.
Yeah, you probably made the right call. Like, as bad as Tokyopop's translations are, the scans of GTO weren't a whole lot much better. I mean, yeah. I just tried reading Bad Company, the scanlations recently, and, those are, the typesetting, the font, like, the grammatical errors, like, Tokyopop is bad, and it's unacceptable quality for a publisher, but they're still better than a terrible scanlation like that at the end of the day.
I mean, they were basically hiring scanlators, but in reality, they were hiring a lot of like college students and paying them basically nothing to translate that stuff. I remember pictures of. Oh, sorry, go for it.
No, I was just gonna say, and their work shows for like probably the first half of the series, because I would constantly tweet about how like, because you could tell like when they replace the Japanese text with like English text, they don't bother like redrawing any of the space in which the Japanese text was occupying. So you could still see like hints of like where the hiragana was and like some of where like the chapter titles are supposed to be, and it's like it's really shoddy work.
GTO was an early entry into Tokyopop's format change too, so that was like one of their first titles when they went to the standard like manga, the tankobon digest size.
Yes, and they were so proud of themselves. With at the back of the manga had this logo going "Leading the Manga Revolution."
They kind of did, but they anyway, we can talk about that when we talk about Tokyopop, but. Oh boy.
Yeah, I get the feeling that Tokyopop could probably fill an entire episode of a podcast.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot to talk about from a lot of different angles, and Stu Levy, or Levy or whatever, the guy who runs it, is a very charismatic, very nice guy, but he is the shadiest guy in the universe. Super shady.
Yeah.
Wow, that's really interesting to hear. So yeah, I basically collected all of GTO, and I had seen that Sid wanted to do an episode about GTO, and I was like, oh well, I guess it's a good thing I suddenly collected all of GTO. I guess we'll talk about it. So I read all of it, and I guess that leads up to our recording the show today. And I've read all of GTO at this point, and I haven't really dabbled into too many of other Fujisawa's entries in the franchise. Like, I've never read Bad Company. I have 2 volumes of Shonan Junai Gumi, otherwise known as the early years. I'm definitely going to start collecting that whenever I can. So I've basically like flipped through that, but I haven't actually read it. And then I basically haven't read any of the other spin-offs or side stories that have come after GTO. I've seen a little bit of the anime, like maybe 10 episodes or so. A friend of mine actually is a big GTO fan. And by big GTO fan, I mean she's seen the anime and she really loves that, but she hasn't actually like read any of the manga. But she also really likes the So, I guess confirm something for me, Nick, because I feel like I'm going to get this wrong. So you mentioned, you had, torrented, I guess the drama for GTO. So was there a drama that it aired back in the day? And then, cause I know there's a drama on Crunchyroll that, like, just recently was produced and released, like, I think as far back as 2011.
That's the Taiwanese drama. The one I watched was the one that was coming out while the comic was coming out in the early 2000s.
Okay.
That was the first one they did, and it's so good, and they barely use the actual stories from the comic, but the guy playing Onizuka is perfect. The woman playing Fuyutsuki is perfect. Like, it's a really well done series.
I'll have to go look for that. That sounds really awesome, actually.
Yeah, and you can tell that GTO was like popular from the start because that drama came out only a little more than a year after GTO started in magazine. GTO started in 1997, and the drama came out in 1998. So, wow. Yeah, it was a fast turnaround there. So GTO was kind of like an immediate success. I think we should go and give a little bit of background on GTO as a franchise.
Sure.
So GTO is created by mangaka called Tohru Fujisawa. He is 50 years old as of this year, actually. And he has mainly worked for Kodansha and specifically has serialized most of his titles in Weekly Shonen magazine. His first work, which was short-lived, was called Aretsugata Junjo Boy, which was a story about a boy who was raised like a girl by his parents to succeed in the traditional theater of the family where a male actor needs to act like a woman. So that manga was short-lived. So, I might check it out because I like gender benders, but
it's weird. It's really weird.
But yeah, his main success came shortly after finishing Aretsugata when he started up Shonan Junai Gumi in 1990. And that ran for 31 volumes, 6 years, very successful series. And after that, he did a short 1-volume work called Bad Company, which was a prequel to Shonan Junai Gumi, which told the story of how Eikichi and Ryuji met and before they formed the Onibaku. And then finally, GTO started later in 1996. And that was clearly a huge hit right out of the gate. And yeah, that ran for about 6 years, 25 volumes. And then Fujisawa did some other works after that, like Rose Hip Rose. But he came back to the GTO franchise in 2009 for the 14 Days in Shonan, which ran for about 2 years. And then since then, he keeps making new spin-offs and side stories. Head Gargoyle came out in 2012, and that ran until 2014 for about 5 volumes. And that was about Saigiyama, Onizuka's friend who became a police officer. And then Ryuji got his own spin-off called GTR, which was just a 1-volume work. And then now, currently, Fujisawa is doing GTO Paradise Lost, which began in 2014 and is actually serializing in Young magazine instead of Shonen magazine. So that's been going on. And it seems like the franchise keeps having a lot of longevity because in addition to Fujisawa just creating more spin-offs and sequels, it keeps getting like new adaptations like that aforementioned Taiwanese drama that came back in 2014. And there have been plenty of dramas over the years as well. So GTO is a very popular franchise. And I think to delineate the difference between Shonen Junai Gumi and GTO is that you can kind of make the comparison between Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z, because GTO is like internationally the far more well-known and successful work akin to Dragon Ball Z, whereas the early stuff, Shonan Junai Gumi, is lesser known and less popular internationally, even though it is actually longer than GTO itself. But it's also, you can also make a comparison because it's more comedy focused and there's a lot of dick jokes and sex jokes in it. So,
it's like the entire series is about Onizuka and Ryuichi trying to get laid.
Yeah.
In not very subtle terms.
Oh yeah. There's they pop some gigantic boners in their face. And it's amazing the content standards back in Shonen magazine back then. Like, even now, Shonen magazine is the raunchiest of the Shonen magazines. I mean, are not afraid of showing a lot of TNA, but oh boy, the stuff that they pulled in Shonan Junai Gumi, man.
I'm pretty sure when I was flipping through the first volume of Shonan Junai Gumi that I kept coming across a few pages where Onizuka's in like a body cast and you can see his boner through the body cast.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's really great. Oh boy. But I guess, yeah, was there anything else you wanted to touch on, Sid?
Now that's the background of GTO as a franchise. So I think now we can dig into GTO itself, what it's about, and what makes it so good.
Yeah, so what is GTO about, Sid?
GTO follows Onizuka, who at the beginning of the series is about 22 years old. He's kind of grown up a little bit from his Shonan Junai Gumi days as a delinquent, like, punk guy. But, you know, he's still a pervert, and he's still a virgin, and, he's still super horny and wants to really get laid. So he comes up with this great idea of becoming a high school teacher so he can get with the students. Because he hears stories about how teachers get laid a bunch. So he does that, but then ends up teaching at a middle school instead, and ultimately just kind of connects with the kids and actually does, like, start helping them out a lot. And so, you know, he's still trying, he moves on to trying to get into a fellow teacher's pants instead of his students. And he actually does, like, embrace the idea of becoming a great teacher because he kind of finds his calling in it. Although his methods are unorthodox, to put it lightly.
Most unorthodox.
Yes. If you talk, Korosensei was an unorthodox teacher. The original GTO was, he pulled off some pretty crazy stunts, and he was a human being.
So, I think that's as good as transition as to any into, I wasn't expecting to start off with this, but just kind of going into my thoughts as somebody who's only read GTO and nothing else. That was actually something I was, because I'll admit, I think for probably the first, I want to say roughly like around 10 volumes or so, I did not hate GTO, but there were some aspects about it that I just couldn't find myself getting into, like the whole, you know, Onizuka wanting to become a teacher so he could get with the students. I get that this might be just me, but I thought that was a little weird, but I guess back in the 90s, that was something that was supposed to be really funny or something. I don't know. That might be just me being a prude. I don't know.
It's kind of scuzzy, but it's hard not to just laugh at Onizuka's antics.
This is true, yes.
You know he's not going to succeed. And I'm sure if you've read Shonan Junai Gumi, you know he's not going to succeed. But so it's just enjoyable to, like, see him, like, salivate over this idea of getting with high school girls. But you know it's going to be unattainable for him. He's not actually ever going to actually go through with it. So it's kind of, like, more harmless in that respect. But, you know, it is, in many cases, a little uncomfortable, especially, there are some moments where he does cross a line with his students, like, very early on when he's like, he spanks Anko and her friends and like writes on their underwear and stuff. You know, it's goofy and funny, but, that's sexual harassment, no two ways about it.
Or when he summons the local chapters of the Bosozoku and straight up tortures 3 guys in a park.
Yeah.
That's totally normal teacher behavior, you know?
Actually, I forgot to mention, my friend had shown me the anime first, and I was like, I was enjoying it, but, like, for some reason, I couldn't get past, like, how the anime looked, because to me it looked kind of cheap in some places. So, like, I didn't think it looked very appealing, which is another reason why I wanted to read the manga, because I thought I would enjoy the art in the manga more. To an extent, I was kind of right, but sometimes the art can be a little cluttered in a few places in the beginning. But I think Fujisawa gets a lot better about that later. But just going back to what Nick was mentioning, I think that was the moment where I didn't expect that at all. I didn't see. I guess I didn't expect Onizuka's actions in the beginning. Like, that was one of those moments where I thought, like, oh, it was going to go another way. but then Onizuka does a complete 180 and completely like bashes whatever expectations I had for however he was gonna like handle the situation there. So that was when I thought, okay, this is a series that I could like. So I really appreciated that.
Yeah, no, he's a thug to the core. That's like, they don't try and hide that at all. And he does, in the beginning, he tries to be like a straight up legit teacher, and then it backfires on him, and then that scene happens, and he's like, wait a minute, I can be a teacher and be a thug and make it work? This is genius,
But yeah, I guess just going back to originally what I wanted to say, a criticism that I kind of had of GTO for basically the first half of the series was that, Onizuka's hired to be this teacher, but like the thing that kind of bothered me about it the most, and something that I gradually became less and less like, I guess, worried about as the series went on, because I kind of understand the point of everything going on and why he was hired and everything. But at first, Onizuka being hired as a teacher kind of bothered me, because it felt like he wasn't really like obviously, it didn't feel like to me he was really teaching his students anything. Like, because there are times when like Onizuka will just be in class, just dressed up as whatever. Like, he dresses up as Devilman at one point, which is pretty great. And then he dresses up in a very like, I guess, I don't know how you want to call it, erotic elephant costume.
Yeah, elephant costume's very iconic.
So some of that stuff is funny, but like, what kind of bothered me at first was I was kind of expecting there to maybe be like a character arc where maybe like, not only, because I appreciate, Onizuka being, I guess, sort of the bridge between teacher and student, and eventually having his students being able to like trust him and whatnot, and a lot of that stuff is great. But when I was first reading GTO, I was kind of hoping that like maybe Onizuka could like also learn from his students about how to actually maybe teach his class. Like, does that make any sense?
Well, he kind of does. One thing I really love about GTO is that Onizuka and his students form a real connection, and he helps them out and corrects their behavior when like they're going astray, and they in turn, when he is kind of straying, from his own character and like gets blinded by greed or money or whatever and loses sight of, what's important, like they steer him back on the right path too. So there's like this very mutual beneficial bond they forms through the manga. And I think that's really the emotional core of it. And the lessons Onizuka is teaching his students aren't like really academic or like he's not teaching them like information, but he's teaching them to be better people and to like be more confident in themselves,
But he's also making an investment in their like psychological well-being, because time and time again he brings up these teachers who would just call him scum and call him worthless and whatnot, and that really affected him. That put him on his path. So the fact that he goes so far out of his way to engage with his students on such a personal level is him trying to correct the wrongs of his own past, and that's the core of his endearment right there.
Exactly. That's set up very early on when he first meets Uchiyamada, and like Uchiyamada chews him out when he's applying for the job and tells him like he's trash, he's scum and stuff. And then later when Onizuka is talking to Sakurai, he tells her like saying stuff like that to kids really messes them up. And if he ever became a teacher, he's going to make sure that his kids won't ever be subjected to that kind of verbal abuse. And that he would try and steer them in the right direction. And that's really the heart of what Onizuka is trying to do.
Yeah. But also, there's an interesting social criticism going on in a lot of the comic, too. I mean, less so in the later volumes when it just turns into pure drama. But kind of really early on, the whole Uchiyamada character is all about this weird political hierarchy that goes on in Japanese education, where like diet members get phased out of the diet and then they become education ministers, and they say, well, this is how education should be, even if they've never spent a day of their life working in education. They get put in these positions. So people who are in charge of a lot of the aspects of education over there, they may not necessarily be the best people to be doing it. And the way education is shaped is not necessarily in the best interest of the students. So Onizuka also represents this other side that, like, education should be about enriching the students and not about what some old fart decides is best for students based on something,
Yeah, GTO does have a very harsh critique of the Japanese education system and like the idea of the hierarchy within it that seeks just for like career advancement over like the welfare of the students. And I think that's a problem that's systematic in education systems across the world. And it's also like a resentment that kids feel towards like the education system across the world, which I think is partly why GTO has this widespread international appeal and is so resonant.
Yeah, I can
definitely
totally agree with that. I do just want to say, like I said earlier, whatever criticisms I had about Onizuka as a character and whatever character arc I thought he should go through, I quickly became less and less adamant about those as I kept reading through the series, mostly because I finally was kind of starting to understand what the series was going for and like how these characters work and whatnot, because that was another thing too when I was first reading the series was because in the beginning obviously a lot of Onizuka's class 4 is so terrible to him, and they do all this terrible shit to him, like forge like risque photos of him and plaster them all over the school, spread rumors about him, try to constantly get him fired. And, a lot of that just left me wondering, like, what the hell did teachers do to these kids to make them, like, act like this? And, for the longest time, I was afraid that wasn't going to be explored, but thankfully it is. And, oh boy, let's just say the second half of the series for me, I think, is probably my favorite. I definitely prefer the second half to the first half because, not that I didn't think the first half was funny in places, but it was just a lot of like me being like, I want to know the story behind these kids. I want to know what exactly happened to make them this way. Cause to me, that's what Great Teacher Onizuka is all about, is basically just a story of a group of kids who were burned by adults in some way, shape, or form, and them learning to be able to just trust adults again, which I think is very gripping and endearing.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you that when I was reading the series for the first time, I did start to get tired of it, like, towards the middle, and I was feeling it was getting very repetitive, but some of the more dramatic arcs in the second half really picked me back up. Being a little more distant from the manga now and just, going back to the anime a lot more, a lot of the first half of the series is a lot more ingrained in my memory and it's easy, and like I can like think about all my favorite moments a lot more readily from that first half, whereas I just haven't gone back to the second half of the manga in a while. But like I do agree that I think that at some point, when GTO starts shifting to those more dramatic arcs and really starts digging into like, what has scarred some of these students a little more, is particularly Miyabi and Urumi, that's when it really starts, really veering back on the right track and becomes a lot more engaging as a dramatic narrative.
What do you think about these opinions, Nick? Because I remember when I was first reading GTO and tweeting about it, you had told me that the series kind of gets pretty repetitive at some points later, and which I thought was kind of interesting because I really felt like even pretty early on, like even as far as like I don't know, like not even 10 volumes in, I was feeling like, man, this is like the fourth time Onizuka's had to save a kid from jumping off a building. I'm totally not tired of this trope yet, or whatever. That storytelling device in particular was kind of grating on me a little bit because, like, I think it was around the point when Urumi is introduced as a character and we start spending time with her, when she, I think, that moment when Onizuka accidentally bumps her off the roof, I felt a little robbed of, like, whatever emotional attachment I was supposed to have for that moment. But I guess it, like, you know, to counter my own point once again, it also, you know, that moment kind of becomes more comedic as it goes on, because it leads into this whole thing where Onizuka's trying to get rid of now a presumably dead body, and it goes so far as to even, like, bury the body in, like, Mount Fuji or whatever, which was all pretty funny. But I really felt by that point in the story that I was getting kind of tired of that setup in particular.
I don't know. I mean, I think the first 13 or 14 volumes of the series is really where the core of the series is. I get what you're saying about the latter half, that he really gets more into the direct drama and into the backstory of these students. But, you know, honestly, I didn't feel like that was a story that really necessarily needed to be laid out like that. Like, you know, some things sometimes are better left unsaid, right? So when you get into the story and when you get into the latter half of the series, it just felt way too melodramatic and felt forced in a lot of places. That like he was trying to shift it away from comedy more to drama, and the comedy, while it was still actively present, wasn't necessarily as like good or thought out. Whereas in the beginning of the series, the comedy kind of leads into the drama, and the drama leads into the comedy, and it was this more organic experience. So, I mean, I do agree that the latter half has some really engaging moments, but the first half, I think, is really where the series shines. And yeah, it does get repetitive in places, like the you know, you were saying the jumping off buildings aspect of it, but at the same time, you know, the pranks that they're pulling, and Onizuka's like problem solving mentality in those early chapters too, is just really unique and creative and fun. And I don't know, I started to lose interest later on, but I still enjoyed it in the end. It just didn't feel like the same comic anymore, you know?
Yeah, I can understand that perspective, because it does have kind of a tonal whiplash problem when it starts to veer into the more dramatic stuff. I do think, though, that I did feel like I got a little tiring 10 volumes in or whatever, you know, so back when I was initially reading it. So I remember, like, just feeling like I wanted just something to shake things up and, like, you know, change the status quo. And, like, after the Okinawa arc, when Sakurai's grandson comes in, like, after that point, we start getting, like, some more, like, dramatically engaging arcs, and that kind of pulled me back into reading it a little, and for the rest of the run. But I agree with you that, like, the most iconic and memorable parts of GTO are in the first half, and so I think that's kind of why I'm, like, very comfortable nowadays. Just when I want to revisit GTO, I just watch the anime. For a variety of other reasons, too. I kind of just go back to the anime over the first half of the manga, but, like, the first half of the story, just in general, I do kind of agree that is kind of, like, the core of GTO in terms of, like, the most iconic parts of it.
Yeah, I can see that.
Sakurai's grandson is a good example of what I'm talking about. Like, the kids in the beginning are just really upset, you know. Urumi, to an extent, is a little bit like Sakurai's grandson, but Sakurai's grandson is just an anarchist, like, and that's when it starts to kind of like spin off the rails. But, you know, in the beginning, you know, the kids, their destruction and their like bad behavior and stuff kind of has a purpose and kind of has a reason. And Sakurai, you know, he's got his reasons, but at the same time, it's like, how explosive can we make this? You know, I don't know.
Yeah, but I guess just to say, yeah, I think the Okinawa arc was pretty much the arc where I kind of became the most invested into the series. That is a lot of great moments, especially with Noboru. I think is the MVP of this entire series. Honestly, if we're just being honest here, because he's one of the first kids. He's not only one of the first kids that Onizuka helps out, but you really feel like he's there for most of Onizuka's journey. Like, and you really feel like, you know, Noboru kind of becomes a more admirable, better person thanks to Onizuka's, influence.
I mean, they're besties.
Yoshikawa definitely has like one of the most like emotionally satisfying arcs of the students for sure, and definitely that trip to Okinawa really kind of culminates in him like standing up for himself and coming into his own. So I definitely also agree that the Okinawa arc is like probably my favorite part of GTO as well, because it just has a lot of fun moments and a lot of emotionally satisfying moments too.
And I especially like how his relationship with Anko plays out, because did they not have it pretty good in the beginning? But I don't know how their relationship turned out the way it did almost, but I'm really glad they kind of have a thing together, because I think it's kind of cute.
I was somewhat uncomfortable that, they start a relationship considering all the horrible things Anko did to him. But it ends up working out, and, like, I can buy into it because of, like, the stuff that, happened in the Okinawa arc, and the time they spent together, and spent getting to know each other a little better.
And also something I really like about Onizuka as a character is, I really like how, he'll stand up against the teachers when they're obviously in the wrong for calling their students trash or whatever. But I also like during the Mayu arc when he ends up arm wrestling all those guys at the club. I like how that kind of turns on its head where, in that situation, all those people who were either expelled or suspended from school or whatever are kind of in the wrong. And Onizuka's basically like, hey, well, you know what? It's your life. You gotta do with it how you can, like it's not always the teacher's faults or whatever. Like it's your life, got to do what you can with it. And I really appreciated those moments as well. How, it's not always like one side over the other that's always wrong. Like most of the time, both sides are kind of in the wrong.
Right. He's very sympathetic to the students, but when they're acting out of line, he does like, chastise them and correct their behavior a little bit and like prove like they need to take responsibility for themselves in a lot of ways. Like, when Anko was trying to get back at Onizuka for, like, taking pictures of her and stuff, where he was trying to get back for Yoshikawa. So when Anko, like, got her mother involved and tried to get Onizuka fired, and, like, then the truth came up, and then Anko was just, like, yelling at her mother saying, like, this is your fault that I turned out like this. You were never there for me. Like, Onizuka tells her, shut up, Yuhara. Like, take some responsibility for yourself and your own actions. That's what adults do, So, there are moments like that in the series where Onizuka, like, kind of shows the kids, like, the error of their ways and, like, that their actions will have consequences and they need to take responsibility for themselves and, like, how they want to be and how they want their lives to be. Mm-hmm. And, like I said, Onizuka teaches these kids important life lessons, which is more valuable than, like, just any random information factoids to cram for tests and get high test scores.
Mm-hmm. I guess, while we're still kind of on the subject, I know we all kind of have our mixed feelings about the second half of GTO, but do you guys happen to have any arcs from that second half that you think that either like kind of stand out to you or you think you really like the most? Or
there's this one arc where Arumi's in trouble and she's like, about going to commit suicide or whatever. And like, Onizuka, he's like, rushing to, go to her and stuff. And like, I remember this moment where like, he's like obsessed with this one thing, like about, that has to do with his own reputation or whatever. And Morai's like, what's wrong with you, man? Why are you thinking this way? And that kind of like brings Onizuka kind of back to his senses a bit. And that's what I'm kind of talking about. I like that, when Onizuka corrects the students when they kind of steer off the wrong path, but the students also, correct him as well. And I believe Uchiyamada also, really came around in that arc as well, in his own ways.
Yeah, Uchiyamada was a really interesting character for me, because, like, I really went back and forth between being really against him, sympathizing him, being against him again, and that Uchiyamada's character was kind of a roller coaster for me.
He's extremely lovable to hate, because you can sympathize with the fact that, he wants to be with his family and wants to be closer to them and stuff, but like, the stuff he does can be so despicable sometimes. Like, he is openly perverted and he thinks of the students as trash. And like, Onizuka helps him become a better teacher in person, even though it takes a while for Uchiyamada to kind of warm up to him, and even in the end, he really still doesn't like him all that much, but he gains some modicum of respect for him. And of course, the Crested gag is classic and never gets old.
I do want to give a shout out to the anime for having Cho, the voice of Brook in One Piece, voice Uchiyamada, because I really think to me he is Uchiyamada. He just does such a great job of bringing that character to life.
It's impossible to hear him do voice acting in other series and not think of Uchiyamada. It's like that's a permanent association for me.
Yeah, I really felt like I really liked that part of the arc where Uchiyamada just keeps going on and on and on throughout, like, the latter half of that arc with Urumi about just his position and, what's going to happen to me, and, what about my family and my position and whatever, and it felt so satisfying to see Onizuka finally just roundhouse kick him in the face.
Yeah.
Because I like the entire latter half of the arc. Because I felt like the audience insert there for a second. Like that's what I want to do. I want to punch him in the face. Because God damn it, every time there are some times in GTO where like it'd be a chapter with just Uchiyamada, and it's just so much text to read, and I hated it so much. So I for a while I just hated it when Uchiyamada talked, because that would just mean more reading for me. But, like, his character is really, to me, I think, becomes legitimately interesting around that point, because Uchiyamada, at the end of the day, is just a man who had good intentions, who wanted to be a proper educator, and then, he became this cynical old man, and it just became all about protecting himself and protecting his position and just making sure he had money or whatever. And I thought that aspect about his character was interesting, and I really liked where that arc took his character, which makes me sad that, like, I do agree, I do think he kind of likes Onizuka a bit more, but a part of me couldn't help but think that, like, I don't know, I personally felt like his character sort of regressed a little bit, because, like, things just kind of went back to normal with him about, it kind of went back to his old shtick about, giving Onizuka shit about whatever, and him worrying about his cresta or whatnot. That's just me personally. But, like, overall, I think I enjoyed Uchiyamada's character a lot more than I was expecting to. So that was a really nice surprise. And as long as we're talking about this arc, that entire arc with Urumi, and the more we learn about her home life and how she was conceived, I don't know why that brought up such strong feelings with me, because I think around that point where you find out that she was basically, as they put it, a test tube baby. Like, she was basically artificially inseminated. Like, she wasn't conceived out of, like, any kind of, like, loving relationship or whatever. She was just conceived basically because it'd be convenient for her mother. Which, I think really rubbed me the wrong way when I first read that. Like, during that arc, there were a lot of times where I had to put the book down and just kind of pace around, because I was actually, like, getting really angry. Because, I don't know, somehow that just really rubbed me the wrong way, and it brought this, like, real angry emotion out of me. And I really wasn't expecting that, reading this stupid comic about a teacher who wants to get laid.
Yeah, for me, stories about families and relationships between parents and children really affect me, probably because of my own relationship with my family. So, like, stories like that about, like, Urumi feeling like she was not born out of love, her mother doesn't love her, and, like, there's this just coldness in the relationship, that definitely really got to me as well, and I definitely really...
Because there's a point where, like, Urumi tells her mother that, if you weren't ready to have a kid, maybe you shouldn't have had me. And I thought that was going to lead into a whole, thing where it's like, oh, no, your mother loves you after all, and you just don't understand. She does all this for you. But I love the misdirection where it turns out, no, Urumi was kind of right.
Mm-hmm.
In where, she basically had her, just because it'd be convenient for her. She could use another stooge to work on her stock markets or whatever she was working on.
Yeah, it's very despicable, to conceive a child just to use it. So I think that really got to me, particularly.
What were you going to say, Nick?
I was gonna say she honestly, she's one of the most endearing characters in the series for me. I think she's probably one of my favorites, and the whole explanation of how she got to be the way she is, it was honestly heartbreaking, and you kind of get the sense oh, this is why she's lawful evil. I don't know. I do agree that was one of the more endearing parts of the second half, and the fact that she got to be more fleshed out, and that is one of those cases where maybe the story being told is worth telling.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I definitely agree with you guys on that one.
I guess what about I definitely want to talk about this a little bit. How do we all feel about the subplot with Teshigawara and Miss Fuyutsuki?
Honestly, I barely remember how that ends. I remember, in the one way he's in the sewers or whatever, and there's
you're thinking of the English teacher.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, Teshigawara is the really pompous guy who thinks he's also smart and whatever, but he has this really perverted kind of fantasy with Fuyutsuki, and he also is being dominated by a student, he's homeroom tutoring, and so he has this weird sexual fetish thing going on.
Yeah.
He hates Onizuka because he's this he's an elite graduate of Tokyo U or whatever, and Onizuka doesn't have much of an educational background, but Azusa likes Onizuka more and stuff, but
So Teshigawara, his character was really interesting because I definitely despised him, as I think we all should. But I feel like his character is also more interesting the more you learn about his background, because he obviously comes from a very strict family who had a lot of plans for his future and what he should grow up to be. And I thought a lot of that was really interesting, and I wasn't expecting a lot of that. And I think the great thing about it is I don't necessarily sympathize with the character, but I think from his adolescence and the way he grew up, I think a lot of his actions in the present make so much sense. And I kind of like how his character comes around, without, to me, I didn't feel like it was as much of a, well, maybe it was supposed to be a sob story, but I personally didn't entirely sympathize with him, because again, it's one of those things where Onizuka says it's your life, you should take responsibility for it.
I think GTO is very good at building up the backstories of all its characters and make you understand how they became the way they are without erasing their guiltiness in what they have done. And basically it doesn't excuse, there's the word I need. Excuse the fact of what they have done. But,
exactly.
You can empathize with why they became the way they did. In most cases.
In most cases, not in his case, man. I don't agree that his backstory. Yeah, it was a
I can understand.
Pretty horrible backstory.
I don't like him, but I understand.
No, yeah, I still don't like him, but I think his actions make more sense just because of the more you learn about his mentality.
Also, empathize doesn't mean sympathize. Empathize is just you can understand from an emotional perspective, why someone is doing what they're doing. You can, it's not you sympathize with them. It means, you feel compassion for them. Empathy is just, you can understand them. So, I'm not using that incorrectly there.
I don't know. I actually, when you were talking about what our favorite segments from the second half were, I was going to bring this whole story arc up, because I felt like all of a sudden GTO turns from this lighthearted comedy into a psychological thriller, like out of nowhere. And I don't know. I thought it was a kind of neat tone shift, and the fact that it gets really serious really quickly, and the jokes kind of stop flying as much in that one. But man, Teshigawara is like, Fujisawa is good at making characters that you like, but if he really wants you to dislike a character, he goes in, Even after learning his backstory, I left that story arc just nope. Teshigawara is all nope.
I totally understand that too, because I think at the end of the day, even with like the resolution of his character arc, I guess I could still understand just utterly despising the character, because he does still go through many lengths to try to kidnap Azusa and try to basically make her marry him and all that creepy stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, we're talking about a series where there's a guy wearing a gas mask and with a recorder and a clear umbrella going under the girls' stalls to like record them going to the bathroom. So there's some disgusting characters in this series, but Teshigawara is top tier, I think.
And even that character, we get like a taste of his like. We get into some like psychological stuff there, because we even kind of learn a bit of a backstory about how that fetish came to be, which I thought was kind of interesting. But okay, sure, I guess we need to know this.
Nah, see that got into really weird territory, and I don't know, like
again, you can't sympathize with why.
I don't sympathize with that character at all. So
no, that's what I mean. What I'm trying to say, it's about empathy. It's like understanding why they are the way they are.
No, it's Sid, like... I totally get what you mean, because I have this conversation with a lot of my friends all the time, especially when it comes to stuff like Gintama, where a lot of the antagonists in that series are like, constantly have like these backstories or whatever about like why they are the way they are, and I constantly get into arguments with my friends because I'm like, I understand their actions and how they came about, and they always constantly like accuse me of like trying to sympathize with them. Oh, like they're still bad people, and I'm like, I know, but like, okay, because so I get where you're coming from, Sid. I have problems trying to express that too.
Well, I don't know. I'm not trying to kink shame Sakurai at all. Like, if that's what he's into, that's all good. But the way he's going about it is the problem. Like, he can be that's totally cool if he's into it. Like, it's fine. But man, there's some like statutory issues and some consent issues, and like, it's just really unhealthy all the way around. So it's, you can understand where he's coming from. You can empathize with his background,
but it's still terrible.
That empathy starts to get a little thin when he starts taking his more extreme actions.
Yeah, all that stuff is just, that's something else. I really didn't know how to feel the first time I read through all that part of the series in general. I was kind of hoping he would get fired in the end, but obviously, the world isn't so kind, I guess.
Nobody gets fired in GTO.
Yeah.
Well, but I guess like the last thing I really wanted to talk about was, I guess, like the final arc where Daimon is introduced, and there's this whole like purging of the school system and all these lengths to try to get Onizuka fired and trying to control the school and whatnot. If you guys remember that arc at all, did you guys have any thoughts on the final arc in general?
Some of it was a little convoluted, kind of like her student group or whatever.
Yeah.
What were they called? Yeah, and the show who was like in love with her, whatever, and like was this crazy guy.
I felt like his character could have been interesting, but I felt like a lot of his character was a little rushed.
Yeah, but like Daimon, like just ostensibly is kind of like represents like the system and like the people who see school as just like a business, and just treat students as like kind of commodities, and like it's all about the test scores and number of graduates. It's not about the quality. It's not about the whatever future lies ahead of the students. It's not about like grooming them to become better people, socially responsible people. It's just about like pumping out students with high test scores, and that's basically Daimon's deal. So it's like just one final like criticism of that are basically it's kind of. I sort of liked her relationship with Sakurai, but, it's all, again, like her like, fundamental hatred is kind of all based on a misunderstanding of, Sakurai saved her from a burning building. It's like, okay. I know,
like,
I'm used to this, but,
I really wanted to get into her backstory, because I felt like that could have been good, but that's what bothered me about that, was that, like you said, it was all predicated on the misunderstanding that, because Daimon's trapped in, like, basically a burning building, and, she had this whole history with Sakurai, because Sakurai was her teacher at one point, and she wanted to trust her or whatnot, and she does everything she does because of a misunderstanding where she thought that, Sakurai basically left her to burn and someone else had to save her. But when in reality, Sakurai did save her, and that's supposed to be a big reveal. But, it's like you said, Sid, like that entire time I was thinking, all of this could have been avoided if Sakurai would have just told her, hey, I saved you from a burning building.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know why, I don't know. I felt like that was a little, I felt like that was a little silly, honestly.
I don't know. The end of the story is very unmemorable for me. So I don't really have a whole lot to say about it, frankly.
It has a nice emotional kind of thing with Onizuka himself, because, he's kind of like pushed himself too hard. Like, he's in danger of, like, really killing himself if he, pulls off another, like, crazy stunt again. So, he's kind of almost at death's door at one point, and he sees, like, a vision of an old friend who, like, passed away. That was a memorable moment. I haven't read far in Shonan Junai, so I don't remember who that character was, but yeah, it was pretty, there's some good emotional moments for Onizuka that, like, it added like a more personal stakes to the arc that kind of got used through some of the more convoluted aspects of, like, what Daimon's plan was, and, like, her like, group. I think they're called the Angels, and other than about it. Yeah, and all that stuff.
Actually, that's another thing I forgot to bring up earlier. Reading GTO at one point just made me want to read the original Shonan Junai Gumi, because I forgot to mention, for the longest time, I actually thought that GTO, Great Teacher Onizuka, was like the first in the franchise, and for some reason, I thought Shonan Junai Gumi was written afterwards. I didn't know that Shonan Junai Gumi came first.
Again, Dragon Ball Z comparison.
Which, just speaking as someone who's only read GTO, even if you don't have knowledge of Shonan Junai Gumi, sometimes there are moments where, like, you can clearly tell Onizuka is reminiscing on his past as a member of his biker gang or whatever. And some of those moments are really nice and really pique my interest as to what his adventures as the adventures of a young Onizuka might have been. And it really just makes me want to read the original Shonan Junai Gumi. But I wonder how I would have felt about GTO if I had read that ahead of time. But I guess just
again, Dragon Ball comparison, like, you're probably going to feel like a lot more emotion in that moment if you have the context, kind of like in the Saiyan saga. Like, when everyone's dying, you're going to feel a lot more emotion if you've read Dragon Ball and been with these characters longer, and, like, you see when, like, you can actually care when Chaozu explodes, and Tien's like, Chaozu, no! And then Tien sacrifices himself. Like again, you're probably going to get a lot more out of those moments if you have the context behind it, if you've read what came before.
Probably.
I don't know. I think that Fujisawa made GTO so accessible to readers who hadn't read Shonan Junai Gumi. I agree that your emotional connection will probably deepen if you do read Shonan Junai Gumi and then go back and read GTO. But I don't think it's really necessary, because the tone between those two comics shifts so dramatically. Like, the humor style, too, I think. Well, maybe not the humor style in its entirety, but at the same time, it's a very, very GTO and Shonan Junai Gumi are just very different in a lot of ways.
Yeah, once again, Dragon Ball Z comparison. Dragon Ball Z, a lot of people can get into it just on its own without having seen Dragon Ball. Because it's distinct, and it's just distinct enough, and it's just accessible enough that it doesn't matter, like, that there's this whole backstory thing of stuff that came before.
Well, that's what I was gonna say was, even with not reading the original Shonan Junai Gumi, I felt like I had a pretty easy time understanding Onizuka as a character without experiencing his past adventures, and I felt like I understood what he was all about, and I felt like even with him interacting with people like Ryuji and Saejima, I could still feel the connection there. Like it made me want to read the original Shonan Junai Gumi, but I didn't necessarily feel like I was like missing out, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And Onizuka is the only character from Shonan Junai Gumi who's like a main character. Like, Ryuji and Saejima are like supporting characters who pop in like time to time. They're not really that important.
Though, to be fair, Saejima at least had helped Onizuka a bit during the Teshigawara arc a bit.
Yeah.
So he's a bit more involved, but I get what you mean overall. Yeah, Onizuka is him being the main character. He's obviously going to be doing more. Which, by the way, Saejima's chapters, because there are like 3 or 4 chapters of just where it's just told from the point of view of Onizuka talking to Saejima about whatever Saejima is up to, whether it be like hooking up with like other girls or going through like illegal trades and stuff. Those were probably some of my least favorite chapters in GTO. I thought at first I thought it was kind of funny, but then the novelty of those kind of wore out on me a little bit.
Yeah, I'm not that into Saejima as a character. Like, he can be fun in a supporting role, but like, he's like some of the more disgusting perv behavior of Onizuka taken up to 11, and it stops being fun with him.
Yeah, there's a part at one point in the series where he implies that he has like date rape drugs, and I'm like, I don't know if I really like this character too much anymore. Makes me uncomfortable.
You can see why I don't like Head Gargoyle. I didn't care for that much, since he's the main character.
Saejima is Onizuka's pretty gross, but then you get those Saejima chapters and you're like, no, Onizuka's good. We're good.
He smashes 2 baby pandas together. That's the worst. It's terrible. I felt sorry for those pandas. Yeah, those chapters were definitely my least favorite. I'd rather read like 5 pages of Uchiyamada text than read a single chapter of Saejima, honestly.
I could honestly be down for a spin-off just about Uchiyamada. I think he's the strongest supporting character, I feel. At least to me, I just really like kind of the dynamic between him and Onizuka, and the antagonism there, but also Onizuka does kind of help Uchiyamada grow as a person throughout the course of the manga, so I also like that.
I honestly don't think Uchiyamada has enough depth or has been given enough character development to have a standalone series.
Yeah, I agree.
They actually did an arc that was just him in Paradise Lost, and it was awful. It was terrible.
Yeah, it was. That's true.
So I'll just spoil it because I don't care. But so his family is all miffed at him and whatever, and so he buys an RV to go camping with, and then he ends up running into some rock star who's abusing his girlfriend, and he rescues his girlfriend from this rock star, whose manager then calls in a bunch of thugs to hunt Uchiyamada down.
Yeah, it's really stupid.
And every time Uchiyamada has a moment of actual character development, he sees this girl's butt or something, and then it just shatters right there, and then he spends 10 pages reverting back to his old self. And even in the end, when Onizuka inevitably rescues him, he doesn't develop at all. It's I don't know. Uchiyamada sucks.
That's part of the kind of regression that I think the spin-offs have. Paradise Lost and 14 Days in Shonan. It's it's more Flanderization of the characters. Partly why I don't like them a lot.
So something interesting. Just a side note I wanted to make. I didn't notice this before until I actually started going back and looking at my volumes. I don't know if it's like this on the Tokyopop editions, but on the Japanese volumes, starting with volume 15, there's a little thing at the bottom that says "Idea Support by SK Produce." So I think Fujisawa is actually getting like input and help in terms of developing the story past the first half of the first half of the series, which I think is kind of interesting.
Huh, that's interesting. I don't think I saw that credit anywhere in the Tokyopop volumes, at least not that I caught, but that's really interesting to hear because, I was researching a little bit about GTO, like looking up its like circulation and everything, because that's another thing too. Tokyopop really makes it a point to like basically the first half of the series, I think, to mention that Great Teacher Onizuka has sold like 37 million volumes worldwide or whatever, and that kind of got me interested in trying to look up like, if that, I guess that stat has been like updated at all since then, because obviously like this release of GTO is from like over 10 years ago at this point.
Yeah.
I mean, go ahead.
No, go for it. I was going to talk about Fujisawa being filthy rich. So I wouldn't be surprised that that GTO has sold that many copies, or like continues to sell tons of copies.
Well, I was also just going to mention that at least according to Wikipedia, I had found that apparently GTO has sold 50 million copies at this point, which I don't know if that's really correct. I saw that, but I didn't really get a chance to like look into it further. But I was just curious about how much it had sold since then, because I don't know. I don't know if this is a weird thing to say, but I don't know how popular GTO is nowadays. Like, I know it was like the big thing like years and years ago, because I remember seeing it around a lot in bookstores and, just coming across a lot of people in real life or online who would talk about it and be like, yeah, this is a really good series, you should read it or whatever. So I can't imagine it's too talked about nowadays. It's popular, at least over here as far as the West is concerned.
Well, it's an older title, so it's not talked about as much, but, still with the existence of stuff like Paradise Lost, like the franchise is still going, and so people who have been keeping up with it are probably still, reading that. And like the series itself was very critically renowned and has like, it's very well remembered in like fandom and stuff. Like if you look at my anime list and, for both the manga and the anime, like they have high scores, like over 8.7 each. Like the manga is like ranked number 13, I think. So, it's extremely popular and well regarded. So it's a series that has had like a lasting reputation. So, if you're getting into like anime manga nowadays, like you'll probably like learn about it and you'll probably go check it out if you're interested. Like that's kind of how it was for me. I got into it because there were friends on a forum that really liked it, and I was like, okay, I'll check this out. So I checked it out.
That's another thing too. Like, because I had seen, because some of the Tokyopop releases have like quotes from other like magazines and other reviewers or whatever, I forget who constantly praise GTO, and for a while, just going back to like how I felt about the series going in, I would see all this praise and I'd be in the middle of the first 10 volumes and I go, this is fun and everything, but like I don't like I didn't really understand the praise for the series for a while, honestly. Until I kept reading more and more and more of it, I'm like, okay, I understand why people like this series now, because it's, as much as I prefer I honestly, like I said before, I honestly do prefer the more dramatic story arcs over the comedy, personally. I understand now why this is such a like well-beloved series, because it is, like, overall, I think it's really good. And honestly, I think it's kind of become one of my favorite manga now, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, I felt exactly the same as you when I was reading it. Like I said, at a certain point, I was getting a little tired of it, and I was like, I don't know why this is so well loved. But then, I kept reading more and I fell in love with it again. Like, I can say I'm a fan of GTO. And, so the reason why I think GTO still is so resonant is because there are a lot of people who as kids might have felt the same way as Onizuka students. They felt like they couldn't trust adults. They felt like the education system was not treating them right, and they felt like they were being victimized. So they lashed out, and when they lashed out, they weren't like, no one tried to go to the root of what their problem really was. They just chastised them. They just punished them. And Onizuka, he doesn't just punish his students for when they do something wrong. Like he really shows them the error of their ways through some unorthodox means, but he also helps them grow emotionally and learn to take responsibility for themselves, learn to be, and like I said, as we keep coming back to this, he helps them learn to become better people. And that's, I think, again, the core, everyone wants a teacher who will look out for you and really has your best interest in art and will go the extra mile for you. They will risk their lives to help you. And I think a lot of people, a lot of kids wanted a teacher like Onizuka when they were younger.
Oh, yeah.
For me, I definitely agree with all that, but Onizuka as a character is just, his character archetype is my absolute favorite formula for a character. He's the lovable underdog that may have some scumbaggy qualities, but at his core, he has a very resolute moral code, and I think that's one of the charms of his character, because like you were saying, Sid, his main concern is for his students and to be that teacher that those students want. And the fact that, he basically almost kills himself a bunch of times trying to reach out to these students and to get there. And, that endearment factor is one of the reasons why this series is just so worth coming back to over and over again, and why I'm willing to suffer through Paradise Lost.
Yeah, Onizuka is definitely a really strong character, and I think the series works so well because he's a very funny character, but he's also a very admirable character, and a very empathetic character, in that some of the things he does, it might cross a line, but you really root for him, and you really kind of see him as this an authority figure you can trust in the same way his students do, and the bond that he forms with his students is very cathartic. I think especially for a lot of kids who didn't feel like they got that in school and didn't feel like they had a parental or an authority figure who really was looking out for their best interests.
I wanted to give a little aside, actually, to those pull quotes you were talking about, Colton, because the reason they may have seemed odd might have been because Stu Levy paid someone to write those reviews and write
serious?
I'm 100% serious.
Wow.
So he did it again when Tokyopop came back. I'm sorry to derail on this tangent, but
no, this is interesting. I want to learn more about this.
So if you thought that they were a little bit too intense or a little bit way too crazy, and maybe you may not be able to track them down anymore, I would very much put money on Stu Levy paying someone to write a glowing review of GTO just to put ridiculously positive pull quotes on the books. Because so he did an interview with Vice magazine or something not too long ago, or maybe it wasn't Vice. It was some other web outlet.
Okay.
And it was basically, the interview basically boiled down to a sales pitch for why people should give them money again. And it was just, it was so shameless. I couldn't believe what I was reading, that any publication would actually put this out there, because there was no content beyond, Tokyopop is great. We totally didn't screw little independent creators and whatnot. We totally didn't destroy the manga market. We're great, So, anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's all terrible.
Yeah. Oh, Tokyopop.
I cannot believe I've only just recently started learning all this shit about Tokyopop. This is all like super interesting to me.
Yeah, we should organize a roundtable, a podcast where we get you on, maybe get some other people on, and they all talk about how terrible Tokyopop was.
I mean, they're back. I refuse to give them a single dollar, a single penny to support them. Like, they seriously almost destroyed the English manga market single-handedly. So I got some strong feels about them.
Well, they're not putting out any worthwhile content anyway.
But Nick, you don't want their copies of their Finding Dory manga in your comic shop?
Dude, oh my god. The super limited edition that you have to get your hands on now, but they've been advertising it for 8 months in previews. Give me a break.
Oh boy. I guess I want to go back real quick to the relatability of GTO and its characters, about what Sid was talking about with people being able to resonate with the series on the students level, where maybe they could have used somebody like Onizuka in their life, just basically a teacher who cares. It's really funny. I found myself relating more to Onizuka in the beginning, just as this guy in his early 20s who's just kind of going day by day, doesn't really know what he wants to do with his life, and just feels kind of aimless or whatever, just trying to find his calling or a job or whatever, just trying to get through things. I found that more relatable in the beginning, especially when I was talking about earlier how, like, I didn't find Class 4 really relatable in the beginning, just because I felt like, again, it just goes back to the whole, like, I felt like a lot of their actions, they provided some good laughs, I couldn't take as seriously, because it was one of those where I was like, oh, well, what exactly, like, what happened to these kids? Like, why are they going to such extreme lengths? And then eventually, when you get the full story about what happened to, especially Miyabi in particular, she's basically the linchpin for all of this, just a short version of that, I felt like I started to maybe relate to the students a lot more as the series went on, so I appreciate that. I can't really think of too many, like, teachers in my life who I really felt like I had a real connection with. I can maybe think of a handful. So, yeah, the more the series went on, I felt like I was able to relate to the students more, but definitely in the beginning, I felt like I kind of resonated with Onizuka in his kind of life situation and whatnot, so I really appreciated that personally.
Yeah, I think that's another aspect of GTO's appeal, is that, like, for adults, you can somewhat relate with Onizuka and some of his motivations and, like, some of his perspective on life as having been, like, this kind of delinquent, at-risk kid when he was younger, and now is put into a position where he has to take care of kids who are very much like himself, and is trying to, steer them on the right path.
Yeah, that's another thing, too. Also, just as someone who maybe he didn't really take school as seriously as he should have, and just somebody who, didn't really like school, just kind of went because he had to, that's another aspect I feel like some people could really relate to when it comes to Onizuka.
I definitely relate to that aspect of Onizuka. Like, seriously, like, the students, I think, were more universally relatable, but for me personally, like, his attitudes and philosophies were almost identical to what I was feeling, when I was reading this in high school. I was like, this guy's a teacher and he thinks this? Get out of here. Because school really felt like a chore, and, I went to a school that, like, really did feel like Holy Forest Academy in a lot of ways, that, like, it was more focused around, like, performance and prestige and stuff rather than actually, like, teaching students. And that's part of the reason why GTO resonated with me so much, is because, all of a sudden there's this character who's fictional, but he's saying all this stuff that I was thinking, and it was just, I don't know, it was the perfect timing for me to be getting into that.
I do find myself kind of wondering how I would have felt about reading this manga when I was high school age. I feel like a lot of it probably would have resonated with me as well.
Yeah, I mean, I read it while I was in high school, and the more I age and more I go back to it, like I do get even more and more out of it. So I think it definitely is a manga that ages well with you and as you grow and mature.
I guess, was there anything else we really wanted to talk about with GTO? Because I think I went through all my points.
I guess we can briefly touch upon the side stories and spin-offs of GTO just a little bit. I don't think there's honestly too much to say. We kind of went over like a brief synopsis of the plots earlier, but
nah, they suck.
Yeah, none of them are worth reading. That's basically the short answer. Just read Bad Company, Shonan, Junai, Gumi, and GTO, and then forget about the rest of the stuff in the franchise.
Yeah, I want to make a point about the spin-off series, the 14 Days and Paradise Lost. Okay, so GTO takes place in like 97 to the early 2000s, right? And the technology in that comic reflects that. 14 Days in Shonan is supposed to happen literally like 2 days after the end of GTO, and all of a sudden everyone...
No, I think 14 Days in Shonan takes place after the Teshigawara arc, when like Onizuka's in the hospital, and there's like this 2-week period where no one knows where he is. I'm pretty sure that's when it's supposed to take place.
Really?
Because Sarumi and Kikuchi show up like halfway into it too. So...
okay. I didn't pay as much attention to it, but anyway, my point still holds. So we're working on like late 90s, early 2000s technology. So he goes to Shonan, and then all of a sudden he's like playing PS3 with one of the students there, and like everyone has iPhones and stuff. And the same thing.
That's weird.
And the same thing happens in Paradise Lost too. Like the technology upgrades again. Except it's still supposed to be like around the same time GTO was happening. So he's really bad at maintaining that kind of continuity.
Yeah. I think what I'm most bothered by with Paradise Lost is that it has like an interesting idea in Onizuka being a prisoner in this jail, but then the manga is just a flashback to him teaching this idol class that somehow is now at Holy Forest Academy that we didn't ever know about until now, I guess. And I don't know when this is even supposed to take place. But again, the problem with 14 Days in Paradise Lost is that it's just the same thing as GTO, except with less interesting characters, and it's just less likable.
Where's Fuyutsuki in Paradise Lost? Like, She appears in the first 2 chapters, and then she just vanishes. It's like, what?
See, I don't know. like Onizuka in prison, like, you would think a lot of, like, really amazingly comedic possibilities would come out of that.
Well,
yeah, but that's not what the manga's about. It's him flashing back to him teaching this idol class while in prison.
While teaching all these prisoners the value of morality or something like that. I don't know. It's weird.
It's a waste.
That's unfortunate.
But also, all the students are just shades of the students from GTO. Like, they have no unique personalities. They're all just basically cookie-cuttered out of GTO into Paradise Lost and, like, reskinned or something like that.
That sounds terrible.
So...
Mm-hmm.
So which of the 2 spin-offs are worse, 14 Days in Shonan or Paradise Lost?
Paradise Lost.
Okay, it's unanimous.
14 Days is just mediocre, but Paradise Lost actively made me angry and how bad it could get and like how bad some of the stories were.
Plus Paradise Lost goes crosses full on into seinen at that point. And like, I think the restraint that I'm using restraint loosely here, but the restraint in GTO actually worked to its benefit. But now that he can just go full on seinen, it's like, there's tone policing is a bad way to put it, but like there's nothing holding him back from just being like, hey, here's like TNA and more TNA, and hey, look, you didn't see TNA for 3 pages, more TNA, and like some of the chapters just get like there's some creepy stuff in GTO, but there's some really, really messed up stuff that happens in Paradise Lost that's like, what is going through this guy's head? Like, this is not okay in some places.
Well, obviously, obviously, his erotic creative juices were very pent up in the late '90s, and I guess this is I don't know. I guess this is just the result of that. I don't know.
Man, that'd be interesting to look at GTO as like projection of Fujisawa's own like own hang-ups and whatever, but I don't think we need to go there.
No, I'd be fine with not learning about that kind of stuff ever in my entire life. That'd be fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, well, I guess. See, I don't know. You guys. I believe you fully that these spin-offs suck completely, but like the more I hear about them, the more I want to kind of like read them for myself and experience them, just out of like super morbid curiosity, just for myself.
I mean, that's fine, but don't come crying to us.
Don't. Here's my advice to you.
Okay.
And this is the same thing I did getting into Paradise Lost after having read 14 Days. Don't have any expectations. Like, seriously, forget everything that you... Aside from, like, the endearment of Onizuka's character, go into Paradise Lost or 14 Days with zero expectations, and you'll be way less disappointed that way.
Oh, I have no doubt that I'll be disappointed. It's just, I'm a sucker for, like, bad things, and I just have more of a curiosity in bad things. Otherwise I wouldn't watch stuff like Birdemic or The Room, but I guess you could argue that those things are enjoyably bad, whereas these spin-offs don't really sound like that kind of bad.
No, they're
yeah, you can laugh at those things. This is just painful. These spin-offs are just painful to read.
Agreed.
That sounds terrible. Oh, well, I mean, if it makes anybody feel any better, they're not a priority. This is more of like maybe I'll read them to see what people are talking about, but I have other things I could be reading right now.
Mm-hmm.
You'll get the idea of Paradise Lost in like the first 4 or 5 chapters, probably. And if you got Crunchyroll, they simulpub it. So,
and as we talked about earlier in the show, actually, Kodansha just started putting those out digitally for sale. So,
oh wow,
yeah.
So I'm sure you can find those on Comixology or whatnot to buy or whatever. I really do wonder what the sales for those are going to be like. But yeah, that really like makes me sad, because like just the idea of Onizuka being in prison should just be like this gateway for like some really funny stuff, and I really feel like could have led to like a really fun manga, but I guess not.
Well, it's not what the manga's even about, so.
I know, but it's kind of a shame that that's not what Fujisawa went with.
Yeah.
The whole way the story's told is he's in prison and this guy's like, "Why are you here?" And he's like, "Well, gather around and I shall tell you a tale." And then it flashes back. And so this like, it's only like 6 or 7 volumes so far. But I get the impression that he's going to drag this out as long as humanly possible to actually find out, like, why Onizuka's in prison. It's dumb.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, Fujisawa has to make that GTO money somehow.
Dude, he's already got bank. He doesn't need more money. When I was in Japan last year, I actually saw a talk show where they gathered a bunch of wives of like famous Japanese celebrities. And Tohru Fujisawa's wife was there talking about their house. So they did a tour of his house. Dude's got a 4-story mansion in the heart of Tokyo with an elevator that goes between the levels. Like,
wow.
This dude is rich.
And how long ago did you see this talk show, just out of curiosity?
It was in August of last year.
Oh, that recent, huh?
Yeah.
Holy shit. Wow, that's well. At least he's doing well for himself, I guess.
He's got his studio floor, and then he's got his entertainment floor. They're separate floors, by the way.
That's amazing.
Wow.
Wow.
So he's not really hurting for revenue right now.
Apparently, like that really makes me curious as to like I guess what the opinion of Paradise Lost in particular is amongst like Japanese fans, and like I guess how well that series actually sells for them.
Well, it's still running, so I guess it's selling just enough.
I guess so. That's really amazing. Wow. Well, I guess with all that, I guess unless there was anything else you guys want to bring up, I don't think we have any emails, do we?
No, we don't have any emails or questions this time around. So I think we can close off the show now. Thank you for coming aboard, Nick. It was great discussing GTO with you.
Yeah, guys, thanks very much for inviting me. It was good times talking Fudio teachers.
Yep. So where can the good people find you, Nick?
You can find me on Twitter at SPD4649. You can also find me... No, really just Twitter.
As for me, you can find me as Lam Ramayasha on Twitter and Animation Revelation. And that's, basically where you can find me.
And as where you can find me on Twitter as SniperKing323. That's SNIPERKING323. I also do a lot of other podcasts. There's Life Lessons, the Gintama Manga Cast, where I cover the old Viz Media release of the Gintama manga from the beginning. And then I also do a podcast about Case Closed or Detective Conan called One Podcast Prevails. If you want to go listen to that, that's at onepodcastprevails.wordpress.com. I guess I forgot to mention, you can also find Life Lessons at gettolifilessons.wordpress.com. But just as for the podcast and all comic and all that, you can find every episode of Manga Mavericks first, obviously, at all-comic.com. And if you want to follow All Comic, you can find us on facebook.com/all.comic or on twitter.com/allcomic_. But if you want to follow Manga Mavericks specifically, you can follow us on Twitter at manga_mavericks, where you'll find the latest updates on the podcast and how editing's going, what we're going to be talking about next episode, whatnot. And, if you have any questions for us, how do you feel about GTO and the franchise? How did you like listening to Nick? Should we have him on again? I think we should, personally. But, if you have any questions you want us to discuss on the show or whatnot, what manga are you reading? What do you think about all the news we're talking about or whatnot? Send us anything over at mangamavericks@gmail.com, and we'll read it on the show. But the most important thing, guys, is that you subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes if you choose to do so. And I think that's going to be about it for this episode of Manga Mavericks. This has been episode 30, and we will see you guys next time for episode 31. Bye, guys.
Sayonara.